Hello, everyone. This is Luca, the London JS organizer. Today we are going to speak about Fuse tool, and we have the advocate directly from Fuse that is speaking from San Francisco. So thank you very much, Jake, to join us today because I know that it's quite early there. So I really appreciate your effort to be here for lunchtime. So, Jake, up to you, and I hope that you all enjoyed this presentation. If you have any question, please drop a tweet, mention London at London_JS, and at the end of the session, we will Jake will answer to all of your questions. Thank you very much.
Yes. So hi guys. Thanks, Luca, for the introduction. As he said, I'm Jake from Fuse. I'm our developer advocate, or Radvocate, as I like to say, because puns are awesome. As Luca mentioned, it is quite early, or in my case, quite late. So if my voice is a bit cracky, that's why. But I'm really excited to be here with you guys, and or at least through technology. And yeah, I hope you guys like what I have to show. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and we'll just get started. Gonna go ahead and push the buttons. Great. All right, so as I said, my name is Jake. And for the past 5 years, I've been working for a company called Fuse. Fuse is a group of about 20 to 25 people, and we have extremely diverse backgrounds. I guess you guys are all are mostly like JavaScript guys and stuff. We originally could not be further from that. We have some guys who are involved in mobile GPU development. If you ever owned a Galaxy S1 or 2, then half the guys on our team made that GPU and stuff, so it's pretty fun. We have some people from the old Flash community who did like community management with Adobe. Some of our guys do Super Nintendo and Amiga hacking in our spare time, so just sort of anything, you name it, we've done it. And we want to help you sort of build great apps. The whole thing that we're doing is we're building sort of a tool suite that app designers and developers can use to collaborate and make things faster and better. The whole idea is that you'll sort of create user experiences with UX Markup and JavaScript. And UX Markup is something very similar to HTML, and we'll get into that into more detail in a second. But the idea is that you'll be able to work sort of how you would on web, with live reload, and you save the file and it just updates. However, what you're actually building is native apps. So the whole thing also is that we want you to work in real time. So like instead of I make a change, my coder makes a change, and then we have to wait for all that to recompile. Sometimes 3 or 4 minutes to actually get from your PC to the device. We want to make it possible to make a change instantly by either changing code or by dragging a slider and like changing the width of an object or something. And we want that to just appear instantly on the device. And I won't be able to show the actual on-device preview during this presentation because I don't actually have a camera that can also film my device while we're filming what I have on the screen. But again, I'll be showing basically how a lot of this stuff works. Our platform is true multi-platform. We are not a web solution, so it is a little bit faster, a little bit more responsive, the apps that you get out of this. Great performance, awesome battery life. You have actually access to all of the iOS and Android features. So when a new iOS version is pushed, you're not going to be left in the dust. Our user interfaces are compiled to native C++ or, in some cases, Objective-C and Java for iOS and Android, respectively. And this is because performance matters. Like when your user is sitting there scrolling through a list in your app, and they notice a little bit of jerkiness, like that's a lot more detrimental than just being a little chip on their shoulder. Like this is what people will feel in sort of response to your brand. Like this is sort of the face of your business, and all of a sudden you have people that subconsciously actually kind of hate part of the experience. just because your scroll viewer was slow or the button didn't feel right. And so these things really actually matter. So I think talk is pretty cheap, and I thought we would just get into a demo so you can just kind of show, or you can just kind of see what this is actually like to work with. So what I've got here is I've just created a very basic Fuse project. And on the left here, I've got my code editor. This is just Sublime Text with a fancy theme that I like. And I'm using Sublime because our tools already have integration plugins for Sublime. And of course, other editors are coming, but this is what we'll be using today. On the right, you see I have my preview. And this is where we're going to sort of build our app interactively. And then down here, I have the inspector, and we'll get to what that is in a second. So yeah, so let's just start banging something out. So as you can see, this basically looks like HTML, but instead of HTML tag, I have an app tag here. I'll get to what theme means later. I have a dock panel here. That's, as you can see, I don't know if you can actually see that on the video, but there's this sort of flashing blue line now around the corner of my screen when I selected this. And that's just saying that this panel here now covers this entire area of the screen. Then I have a status bar and bottom bar background to move the various status bars out of the way. But let's just start making something. So I'll create a stack panel so we can stack some elements. And I'll make a oh, sorry about that. I think my microphone got muted. Should be OK now. So yeah, so we'll just create a button. Now, when I save this, you'll notice that this updates instantly in my preview here. All I had to do was Control S and it's saved. And if I were to be running this on my device, you would actually see that instantly there as well. So I not only would be able to sit here and push this button on my PC, but also on the device. So very instant. So let's we can create some other stuff. So like a text input. This is we can save that, and then this shows up here as well, like that kind of stuff. So really quickly, I want to also get into how we might add, some actual like data model to this. Like now we've sort of just seen basically how we can sort of stack some elements, and we get that, and it's very basic. But how do we actually add logic to this? And similar to writing a web page, we can do JavaScript. Let's go ahead and write some of that. Oops, excuse me. JavaScript. Now, when I want to have a value in JavaScript and I want to display it here, I can do it with data binding. And this works similarly to Angular. So if I do my module.exports here, this object determines what is actually visible to my markup here. So I can say something like the text is, and now we have something called the text available down here. So now if I go down to the button and I change the text, I can do these little curly braces and say the text. And now you can see my button says this string. Now what if we wanted to do this? So what if we wanted to change this text inputs value also to the text, right? So when I say this, you'll notice that now they both say the string. But I want to update the button when I change this, right? So we need some way for this button to react to those changes. And Fuse has a reactive data binding API built around something called observables. Now, if you ever used, I believe it's RxJS or reactive extensions in .NET world, that kind of stuff, there's this concept of observables, and similar to like iterables or enumerators, if you're used to working with those, it's basically a value that is able to be changed. Like you can sort of push values into it and stuff will change. I'll actually show this by example. So we'll say var observable is require Fuse.js/observable. And now we've imported the observable library, so we can actually use the reactive data binding. And now instead of just making this text this one value, I'm actually going to wrap it in observable. So we'll say var the text is observable, and we'll say this string for an initial value. I'll make this point to the same thing, and we'll save that. And now you can see when I update this, the text on my button also updates. And again, this would also happen on the device. So pretty cool. So now you're sort of seeing the basics of how you might actually use reactive data binding to actually react to your model. And what's really cool about this is that we actually have been working on a full sort of running app, like with almost no effort. Additionally, I have this thing called the inspector, which I've been sort of hiding in the corner. I can sort of click on this. Let's say I want to resize this button. So you'll notice when I select this again, I get this sort of selection queue. Hopefully you can actually see that on the stream. But now I can actually start tweaking parameters. So I can sit here and drag the height around as well. Or I can change its alignment, which won't do much because it's in the stack panel. I can make it transparent or opaque, all that kind of stuff. Add some margin. Awesome stuff. And it's just really cool that you can actually do that. And again, if I could show you my my device, this would also be happening there, all at the same time. So really cool stuff. So that was just like a really, really, really basic example. Next, I want to go over sort of a more complicated example. So if we go to our browser over here, one of the examples that we go over with Fuse is this pull to reload example. And it was inspired by this piece we saw on Dribble, where you would sort of pull this down, and then while it's reloading new data for your app, you get this sort of gear spinning, and then when it's done reloading, the panel will collapse. And so we made that into one of our examples. I'll just go ahead and open that real quick. I'm just going to build my preview, and I'll pull up the code here. So the code is split up between two files. As you can see, they're getting a little bit larger now. And so here we go. So here it is running in our preview. And as you can see, I can pull this down, and you can see the gears sort of starting to turn. When I let go, they start to churn, and then eventually the panel will collapse. And so this is sort of simulating that kind of pull to reload scenario. And so the way that this basically works is, just like we've seen before, there is this sort of reactive data binding. In this case, instead of storing a string, we store whether or not this thing is loading. So this will contain a Boolean value. So that's exported as we've seen here. Then we also have some other states. For instance, we have this reload handler here, and I'll get to where this is sort of hooked up in a second. But when this function is called, you can see that is loading is set to true. And this is sort of the same thing, like we would set this to true and then fire off requests to our REST API. And then when that came back, we would go and then set is loading to false again, just so that we can keep track of that state. In this case, all it actually does is set a timeout. So after 3 seconds, we'll actually finish loading. But you can see where that could actually be hooked up. And I'll get to that also in the later example. Yeah, so what's really cool about this is that we have sort of the normal stuff you've sort of basically seen, where we have like panels. In this case, we have a scroll viewer, so I can actually scroll these items around in here. And sort of the usual stuff. Now I have this thing called cogwheel reload, and that actually represents basically this whole thing here. And so the way this works, if we go into this separate UX file, this one is a little bit larger because it contains information about all the gears. So here we have one for a small cog and a large cog, so the different kinds of sizes of the gears here. But as you can see, I just put a bunch of those in a panel together, basically. And those will just go, those will just show up here, as you can see. This is what this corresponds to. What's really, really cool is that, if I can find it here, we have something called triggers and animators in Fuse. And this is how we sort of handle changes in state and sort of reacting, like changing the UI. Like one of the common ways that you might, or the simpler ways you might do this in the web is you might get a handle to a specific DOM object in JavaScript and then just start changing parameters on it, right? And the thing with that is of course, it works. Like you end up changing the parameters you want it to, but it ends up being very messy to deal with. And so what we would really like to have is sort of a a very, much more declarative way of actually writing animations. And so that's what we're trying to provide here. So as you can see, just like we had, these panels or these images, the kind of tags you would expect that sort of declare how your UI is structured and how that actually looks. We also have some other tags that will say like, here is a pull to reload trigger. And what this will actually do is, when I'm pulling this down, this will actually, go to reload it. And so what we have here is we have this is loading field here, which data binds to that is loading state that we saw earlier. We also have the actual reload handler. And so what you can see here is that when I pull it down and it gets beyond a certain threshold, when I let go, then that will actually call the reload handler as a function because it knew, it has this sort of semantics that knows that you're going to pull to reload something. So it knows to call a function, and it also knows to watch on a certain state for whether or not that it's actually loading. And so in here, you can see these state tags. And here we can actually manage other things as well. So for instance, if we're pulling, we can make changes within there. We can say if it's been pulled past the threshold, then we can actually start playing other animations like this one, which will actually move the cogs into place. And you can see that there's an animation here that we've also described declaratively with this timeline and a bunch of changes. And I won't go too much into detail because we'll be here for 5 hours. But you can see that this whole thing is sort of based around building this stuff declaratively. As you can see, when the state is actually loading, it will actually spin the cogs using these spin tags, right? And then you can see the frequency, which is basically like how fast it spins, and the different targets for like which ones are actually spinning. So pretty cool stuff. And this allows us to do some really interesting things. So like when I was working with this this inspector here, again, I can still use that on the elements that are here as well, and everything else still works. What actually is happening here is that this actually isn't really doing any magic here. Like when I go back and click on Sublime, you'll notice it actually flickered a bit. And the reason why it did that is because it actually updated the text. And all it actually did was write that file on disk. But the idea here is that all of our tools sort of work with this very declarative document, which also allows us to build simple tools like this inspector to get this sort of visual editing. But it allows us to interface with other tools as well, for instance, Photoshop or Sketch. And again, I'll get to that a little bit later in the presentation. So now I want to look at sort of another example. And this one's just going to also be pretty basic. So let me open. And so what I'm going to show here is a really basic project that I made to show how this can integrate with an actual backend. In this case, it's going to integrate with Parse. So there's just a very basic project, and I'll send this link to Luca as well, so we can actually put this in like the YouTube description when this goes up. So here's the back end. I'll get to that in a sec, though. I'll show you the front end first. So this is actually the entire code for this app. It's about 71 lines, excuse me. And as you can see, it just says tag here. And we have sort of these tags. And the idea behind this is it's sort of like a tag wall app. So I can sit here and add a tag like, hello, London.js, and tag. And this will actually round trip to the server and show up here. So I can actually show you the back end here. If I refresh, that actually went to the server, and you can see it here. Make that a bit smaller. So pretty cool. So as you can see, this has some of the same building blocks. So we've seen this observable thing. In this case, observables are not only limited to holding single values, but they can also hold multiple values, which gives us these sort of list semantics. And what it basically does is it data binds to this just like we've seen before. There's also another observable that we use for this current text. So when I actually click the tag button and submit this, we can actually create a new parse tag and then send that to the server. There's also, in this case, it's just doing polling because it's a very basic example. And this example has no backend code in Parse, so it's just like the bare minimum that you would actually use to get Parse working. But it does actually work. And one of the things that's really cool about this is that it shows that, we've seen that we can inline JavaScript in our markup files, like we've done here. We can also bring in other JavaScript files. And if you look at I have one here for my API keys, which I'm not going to show because it's my API keys. But I have this other one that is the actual Parse library. And this Parse library was actually, just the same one that they provide on their website, which is the JavaScript client library. And so a lot of these JavaScript libraries just sort of work out of the box. We don't say that we don't support the full node platform or whatever, for very technical reasons, but we do support, quite a lot of the sort of baseline JavaScript features like local storage and XML HTTP request and all of these other things, so that you can really just sort of drag any of those libraries in and just start using it. So, the rest of the code in this example is basically Parse. And then, this very simple form down here. But it's pretty cool. As you can see, I can also add stuff, to the database in Parse. This is another tag, for instance. And there, it shows up in my app. So pretty cool stuff. So another example that I want to go over is going to be something a little sexier. So let me go ahead and open that. So this, here, I'll open the code as well. So again, this is one of those more single file apps. This one's a little bigger. It's around 400 lines. But this sort of shows. So the idea behind this is that you would sort of have an app that you would use to sort of plan, like if you're going to take a trip with your friends, like if you're going to go on a hiking trip or something like that. And you wanted, some way to invite all your friends, make sure you know who's coming, figure out who's bringing what, that kind of stuff. And this particular screen would have been like these sort of feeds, so that as your friends are adding comments or they they followed you or that kind of thing, or they favorited a place, they would actually show up here. Oh, whoops! I actually had some code commented out here. Go ahead and uncomment that. You can see that as well. And of course, that'll just reload. But yeah, so you can see here that there's all these different people. This person left a comment. This person started following this. We also have this little settings menu where you can actually filter the feed. And again, this is just, your basic, full working app. And I hope the transitions and everything in the frame rate, especially, is actually coming through on the feed. If not, I guess you guys can get the idea. But yeah, so pretty cool stuff. And again, this is also using a Parse backend. So a lot of the code is kind of similar to the last example, except that our data model is a lot more complicated because it's not just a string, but it is an actual object that contains other objects. The code itself here again is not as interesting. Oh yeah, we also used moment.js to actually figure out, oh, these were all done a month ago, so you can tell when I wrote this, that kind of stuff. So I kind of want to go over some more of this sort of data binding stuff. So basically I just hook up to Parse and I just create these sort of news item structures based on the data that's actually in Parse. I can actually show you guys that as well. And the reason we're using Parse is it's not like, it's an exclusive solution or whatever. It's just, it is a very easy, database solution to get up and running with. So I hope you guys can sort of see that. Maybe I'll zoom in a little. There we go. Yeah, so I have all these objects here. So it's the user that did the thing. Then it's there's this type field, which is what happened. Did they add a comment? Did they add a like? Did they follow someone? That kind of thing. Additionally, we might have some text that's associated with that action. For instance, Julie here left a comment. And as you can see, that's down here. And the comment text was, "I love my friends." If they follow someone, we also have a followee field, which is who they followed. If they liked some places, we have a places field, which is the places that that they liked. And you created that update, all that kind of stuff. And all we're going to do actually is just go and fetch all that data from Parse. and then just sort of stuff it in these local news item classes, and then add those to this news items observable, which we sort of seen before. And that's just a basic for loop, and again, some polling in this case. So, I mean, not the most interesting JavaScript code, but that's actually a good thing, because you can see like how small and simple a lot of this is. And this is a real running app that actually runs on my phone, so that's pretty cool. So when I can also add comments. I actually forgot about that in here. Add a comment. And again, I can click this send thing, and that will go and round trip to the server as well. So some of the code that goes with this is actually pretty cool. So we have this news items, which is an observable, and that holds all of these items here. And if we go look at the code, there's a lot of sort of panels and just a lot of alignment stuff. But eventually we will find it'll be here, H. So this is another situation in which things get a lot more declarative than they typically are. So if I click on the stack panel, you can see by my indicator, or hopefully you can see by my indicator, that it covers this whole part of the screen right here. And that has a couple pieces in it. The first one is this each tag. And what each will do is it will, you give it something to fill in this items tag, or this items attribute. In this case, it says news items in these curly braces, which is our data binding syntax. And what that will do is for every one of the news items in that list, or every one of the objects in the items collection, it will take the tag in here. As you can see, when I click it, I get a lot of indicators that says that this stack panel actually represents all of these items. And so what's happening here is that for every news item, it will actually take this code in here and basically project it. So like if we have this stack panel here, and we have X news items, then for every news item, it will create a new one of these stack panels and add it to this parent collection here. So what the actual items are is just another little panel. So they have this rectangle divider on the top. Then they have some other stuff. They have this image, and again, I can show off this the cool inspector thing. I can blur all these and change their opacity and whatnot. They also have their own data binding internally. So like there's this panel here, which is sort of who did it and when. And you can see that just has a little text field here that's bound to the username, and a text field here that's bound to created at. Now when I bind to the string username here, what's really cool is that because this is happening inside of this each tag, so this is happening for every news item, this username also applies to that sort of context, if that makes sense. So this will be, it will look up to see if there's a field called username on the news item. And in our case, there will be, because that's the way we set up our data model. So you can see how this sort of starts to scale. And these sort of concepts of reactive data binding will just sort of compose and accumulate. And we're able to do more complex apps and more complex ideas. We also have these really cool other constructs. So panel and text make a lot of sense to the HTML guys. But then we, in addition to each, we also have this thing called match, right? And so if you ever coded in ML or Haskell, you'll recognize match case, which is basically like switch case, but it feels more declarative, I guess. So in this case, we match on the type field of these news items. And again, if we looked at our data model, type said what kind of object was this, right? Or was it a comment or a follow or a like? And so what we can do is we can match on that in this case. So for every one of our news items, we say, well, what was it? Was it a comment or a follow or a like? And depending on which one it was, we can have different contents for this tag, as you can see here, which is pretty cool. Like this is the kind of stuff that would actually be kind of difficult to describe, in a lot of other markup languages. But here it just flows very naturally. And it literally is just like, well, what is the type of this? And you can do this kind of stuff. We can also check other values, like if something's true or false, or against an integer value, all that kind of stuff. We can also bind these things to resources. In this case, for the different faces, I do that. I think I do that also later here. I match on the places, if so, like if it was a like, and then there's a list of places associated that they, different lists of places associated with those likes. I can also, do an each on all the different places, and that corresponds to these. And then I can also match on what the place actually was. If I leave this sort of curly brace, if I leave these curly braces empty, it'll just take the actual object that each is projecting. So pretty cool stuff. So I'm wondering if there are any questions. Unfortunately, I can't. I'm not really hearing anything, so I'm not really sure. But yeah, I guess not. So I'll go back to my slide deck really, and we'll see how that goes. So now you've sort of seen how we can work, with this declarative markup and also JavaScript to sort of, build these apps. And that does a lot for us developers. But one of the things that we really want to work on and solve is how do we, make designers and developers work together. And one of the key things is that because we have, everything sort of revolves around this declarative document, what we get is that developers can edit that directly, right? Like they know what to do with that data, and they're used to working with text. Designers, while they may, run and hide when they see HTML or whatever, they're actually used to working with declarative documents. Maybe not in text, but when you look at Photoshop, for instance, that is a collection of layers and a collection of pixels on those layers or effects that are on those layers, right? And what they're actually editing is also a declarative document, right? And so these things are actually equivalent. So we could do, for instance, take a Photoshop file and extract the layers from that and then put them into a declarative document like this. Or we could do that with Sketch, for instance, right? And it's just really cool that we can, because we're basically working with the same substrate, now these people can actually start working together and start actually collaborating. The other thing, of course, that we are really big on is this real-time preview. You saw when I was sort of making changes that it would actually happen live in my little preview on the PC. It also happens live on the device, which is extremely important because, time and time again, the more app houses we talk to, the more we hear this classic story of, we spent, 6 months, 2 months, 1 month, a week, however long it took to, properly design the app, right? And then we give the prototype to the coder. Coder is totally worth the salt, does a great job, implements the thing as close as he can. But then we go to testing and we're working on this app, or we're testing this app that we work so hard on, and we find that, oh, you know what, this sign up flow really didn't hit it. Like this really wasn't that good. And then what do we have to do? Well, we have to go through that process again, right? So the designer will redesign that, and then that goes back to the coder, and then we go through that whole iteration loop. And if we're unlucky, that takes another week, another month, right? If we're really lucky, it takes 5 minutes because we can recompile and deploy to the device. With Fuse, that can take a matter of seconds, right, to actually change the markup or change the design file, re-import it, and then it's just there and it just works. So that's actually what we think is a really big game changer. And the other thing is that a lot of web tools, like a lot of web-based app development tools, do actually have sort of these properties of, or some of the properties of the live reload that I've shown. They don't have, of course, dragging values and that kind of thing, but they do have, I can save it and then reload it on my device. However, as I mentioned before, we have all the problems of, working with a DOM on your actual mobile phone. Like it is slower, and it is, you may not have access to all the native APIs. And because Fuse outputs native code, both problems are actually alleviated. And it actually, the apps you make with Fuse look and feel great. And I didn't show it in my little demo because I wasn't actually able to show, the actual device. But we have sort of the same, like not only can we, excuse me, gotta take a breath. Yeah, so not only can we, like you've basically seen our custom renderer, which is one of the things we have, but we also can actually use Fuse with the data binding, not just with these custom elements like these buttons and things that we've seen, but those buttons can also correspond to native buttons, right, and native text inputs. So if you ever use React Native, we actually, you can get the same exact fuse workflow that I've shown here, but it also works with native components in a similar sort of way. So as I said, half of us are GPU guys, and from the ground up, the renderer you saw here with the custom buttons and custom look and feel, all of that is totally hardware accelerated and very, very optimized. So you really never have to worry about performance when these are the things you're using. Very, very fast. Again, it all works with native UIs. So the actual button, even when it's using a custom renderer, is a native component that we're interacting with. So even if the JavaScript itself is not native, that will run in sort of a sandbox VM away from your UI thread, right? And so it is still going to be performant. And of course, as I've been mentioning, design tool import is something we're working on prototyping, and it does work in some cases, and we're really excited to show that more when it's ready as well. We really think that working in real time is absolutely revolutionary, right? Like when we're, I mentioned the case where you've designed your app already, and then it goes into testing, and then something went wrong, and you have to go back and make that change. But it's not just there. It's also, as I've shown here, in the first example where I just threw a couple buttons on the screen and tied them together with data binding, you can see there it's already very iterative, right? Like this changes the game from sort of this very engineering heavy, like very meticulously design and sit there for minutes at a time per iteration to get things perfect and align things right, to something that feels more like playing, right? And something that actually feels less like, oh, I'm this meticulous designer and I have to sit there and get all my details right just to tell the device to do anything. It changes it from that to sort of a conversation that you're actually having with your technology, right? As you're able to play with things because there's just no barriers to actually getting code from your PC to the device. Like it's just already running there and it changes instantly. On all your devices at once, like on all of your screen sizes and on all of that stuff. So it's really, really cool stuff. Again, as I mentioned, we're working on visual tools. As you can see, today we had the Fuse preview and also these that inspector that I showed you as well. And again, all of this works because of that declarative. We're all editing this one declarative document, or 2 or 3 declarative documents. So it's really cool the kind of possibilities that this opens for us. And of course, we're building even more. So we're working on integration with design tools as well. We're also building our own suite of very custom design tools to really get the most out of this way of working. And not to mention also the improvements we're still making on developer tools. Like as you can see, we had support for Sublime with this solution. Our community is also working on Sublime for support for Atom. Also support for other editors like Emacs, Visual Studio Code, all that kind of stuff. Visual Studio, the regular version, not code as well. We're also working on support for additional languages that compile to JS. The obvious one is TypeScript. Again, there's a community-driven effort to work on that a bit more, which is pretty cool. We'll also be switching, all of our stuff, but there's also other languages to consider, like F# or Hax, the Hax programming language. I think also already one of the members of their community has already actually tried this and gotten it to work. People are also using Babel.js to add other language support. Really cool stuff. And we're also looking at additional platforms. So right now we support iOS and Android, and also the tool itself runs on Mac and Windows. We're also looking at other platforms like Linux, Windows Phone, that kind of stuff. So as I said, the tool works on Mac and Windows. We also have a very thriving community. Our Slack channel is extremely busy. Our forums are also pretty busy. If you're interested in learning more, I also make videos at least once or twice a week. So you can check that out and hear me talk more about this stuff or see more specifics of how this stuff works. And we're also slowly open sourcing bits and bits of our tooling. Right now, it's starting with the documentation, but then it's going to also continue to the platform. So, we'll always have something, the base sort of platform available. So if we go under or whatever, that will always still be available. So your app will never just die because we died, right? So that's pretty important. And the idea is that we'll always have something that is open source and free that you can actually build an app on. Another thing that we have is we do have a community champions program. So if you're interested in learning more and actually trying Fuse, and you've tried Fuse and you like it, and you would love to start a community effort in London or wherever you're from, and you just like to host meetups or whatever, or give talks similar to this one, we're really, really happy to hook you up, and we'll help you with anything you ever need for that. We're in open beta now. So go to fusetool.com if you want to actually check this stuff out, play with it for yourself. And so that is sort of the main part of my presentation. And really hoping, or wondering if you guys got any questions.
Hey Jake, here we are. Hi guys. So there aren't any questions. I checked Twitter, but nothing appeared. But I'm pretty sure if you can leave us also your personal contact, the guys can contact you directly.
My personal Twitter, you mean?
Yeah, your personal contact, so your email or Twitter account or whatever.
Yeah. So Jake at Fuse Tools is definitely the best way that I can be contacted. I guess that's pretty sufficient.
Okay. Jake, it was very, very interesting. I hope, guys, that you enjoy as well. And this video will be shared on YouTube, I think, in 20 minutes, more or less. So thank you very much for your effort to be here today, early in the morning.
Yeah.
And I hope that you enjoy the vibe that you can breathe from the London JavaScript community.
Yeah, no, thanks again, guys. I really appreciated being able to share this stuff with you, and I really hope you like what you saw. So I would love to hear from you guys, and let me know if you like what you saw.
Cool. Thank you very much, and have a nice week to you all. Thank you, guys.